Oja, unity. This kente cloth was worn by my grandfather over 60 years ago. This cloth represents unity for me. It's the unity of the enslaved Africans in South America, Caribbean, and the U.S. with the African continent. My grandfather understood his roots, and he passed it down to me. He always told me the story of his great-grandmother that was enslaved in the Caribbean island of Grenada. During about 1923, my grandparents, Catherine and Herbert, migrated via Trinidad to Harlem, New York. During the 30s all the way up to the 50s, they assisted many African students with a place to stay and a meal to eat. Herbert did part-time work at a doll factory, and Catherine bought day-old bread just to feed the African guests. Many of these guests considered or called my grandparents Mom and Dad. During the dinner table, they had lively discussions. They discussed Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is the worldview that all Africans, indigenous, and the African enslaved should be united. The Africans organized the first African Student Union. This became so notorious that the Amsterdam News, a Harlem newspaper, recorded that the African liberation movement was at my grandparents' place at 14 Morningside Avenue, Harlem, New York. Some of the guests that my grandfather hosted included Nnamdi Azikiwe, the first president of Nigeria, Julius Nyerere, the former president of Tanzania, Sam Nujoma, the first president of Namibia, and Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana. As you can see the picture below, in 1959, my grandparents were the official guests of Kwame Nkrumah for the second anniversary of the Ghanaian independence. My grandparents, working class, West Indian descendants of slaves, understood umoja, unity, the unity of the Africans in the African continent with the African enslaved around the world.
For American blacks, as members of the African diaspora and mostly descendants of the approximate 8 million survivors of the approximate 14 million direct African victims of the transatlantic slave trade of the 17 and 1800s, Kujichagulia means self-determination, to define ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. Consider this. As people, we become part of family in myriad ways, by birth, adoption, by choice, as in marriage, or other form of decision. Becoming part of family also happens at different times, conditions, and circumstances. At first, other family members, and sometimes even disaffected others, will name or label us. At a point, though, in our awareness, we expect to be recognized, understood, and treated by a name and other distinctions we choose or earn. Our hallmark of self-determination becomes the fruit of our pride, service, and contribution forevermore. Indeed, I don't ever, for example, want to disassociate from being a child of Lloyd and Eleanor Burton and siblings to their 3 other children, and my relations of aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, nieces, and even my wife and our children, their spouse, prodigy, and in-laws. The positions, dispositions, struggles, and joys are what define and make family matter so much. It likewise is such for Blacks as part of the American family. It's not my way or the highway kind of thinking or behaving. Selfishness is quite distinct from self-determination. While acknowledging our place in family lineage and like, we embrace Kuchichakalea, self-determination, as a blessing of God's divine order. May it be so. Alleluia. Amen.
Go.
After reading and rereading and thinking and processing the information on the official KWANZAA website about Ujima, wow, there are so many layers to KWANZAA, and I've only learned the sound bites. The layers require us to listen, learn, and act. And for those in the dominant culture, I think there's even more. The website presents 3 concepts that helps us to understand Ujima, the idea of collective work and responsibility even further. Please keep in mind the context of the African American and the Pan-African collective experience. The first idea is active and informed togetherness. The second one is African freedom is indivisible. And the third is the challenge of culture and history. So let's look at active and informed togetherness. Active cooperation. Just pause for a moment and reflect. And now let's consider, and I quote, "What one does to benefit others," end quote, "benefits me too. And when I injure others, we or me at some level, and or others at some time, it also causes us to be injured as well." Next, how do we reconcile when we injure others? What way do we process it? What is sincere? How do we make it have integrity? How does it truly heal? The second concept is African freedom is indivisible. As long as any African is oppressed, enslaved, or wounded in any way, all Africans are also, end quote. Right here in the United States, just think about Black Lives Matter and everything that's come about and made us aware, or more aware. And then all the many issues on the African continent, and the one in the news right now, what's going on in southern Ethiopia. The third part of Ujima is the challenge and culture of history. The enslavement of Africans destroyed the lives of millions, those that were stolen and those who remained. Contemplate for a moment your family, your village being completely torn apart, literally never seeing people again. If you remain, you've lost loved ones, lost history and skills and wisdom and tradition. Can you even imagine? And then those that were stolen, if they survived, lost all of the same, and their personhood, place, and roles. Think about what it's going to take to rebuild and reconnect and reconcile all that was lost from centuries ago until today, locally and globally. Ujima, collective work and responsibility.
Being an artist is both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, God has given us the awesome gift of creating, something this great God of creation has allowed us to share with her own infinite imagination. We are humbled and honored to take up brush or pen, instrument, or to eagerly perform. On the other hand, will we be understood or appreciated by our peers. The now revered painter Vincent van Gogh wasn't appreciated. I, in fact, was told by a large yellow bird with a bad temper that his 5-year-old could draw better than me. Eventually, Vincent's paintings sold for millions, and millions of children saw and had fun with my drawings. We didn't make a lot of money. Van Gogh, in fact, never made any. All of his paintings were sold after his death, and his life was fraught with disappointment and doubt. But, the point is, we never gave up. My dear husband, Jan, always had a beautiful voice, always. When we were young, I used to plead with him to pursue his God-given talent. But he thoughtfully considered the financial well-being of his young family and saved focusing on singing until after he had unselfishly cared for us. And so he did what was right, and we both worked very hard to achieve security for ourselves and our children. Now he is joyously singing and reaping a harvest of accolades that he so deserves. That is Ujamaa, and that is what Ujamaa means to us as creative beings.
We're living in an interesting time, 2021, after Africans were forcibly taken from the mother continent, arriving in North America in 1619 as slaves considered less than human, were forced to relinquish ties to the continent by brutally stripping us of our languages, customs, and cultures, then being forced to adopt the language, customs, and culture of the oppressors, while learning to read and write was punishable by death, to subsequently be released from bondage but maintained as an underclass through laws and policies created during the Reconstruction and Jim Crow eras, having to fight for equal treatment and the same basic rights guaranteed to all Americans as written in the Constitution during the Civil Rights era, and now in 2021 still having to live with the repercussions of those centuries of disparate treatment. People of African descent are expected to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps, but in many instances we're kept from earning those boots to achieve that goal. My point is not to be cast as a victim. Through each of the eras described, people of African descent have persevered. Some individuals have seen immense success, and as a collective people, we have made many strides. Opportunities today are significantly more abundant than in 1619. With every setback we have overcome and achieved for the greater good. As we discuss the 7 principles of KWANZAA, the Nguzo Saba, these principles are not meant to be viewed as a 7-day holiday celebrated once per year, but tenets to live by, guidelines to strengthen each individual, thus strengthening the community. Particularly, the 5th day of KWANZAA, Nia, meaning purpose, is to make our collective vocation the building and developing of our community in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness. Over the centuries, it has been taught that people of African descent have made little to no contribution to the society of the world, that we have no culture before being taken to America, that Africa was the dark continent that had nothing to offer. Our Nia is to remind ourselves that we come from the continent that is known to be where humankind was born, where trade and commerce contributed to the success of many nations, where mathematics, architecture, and universities were conceived, where the richest man to ever live, Mansa Musa Mali, ruled, and where the independent queens of Kush, the Candaces, ruled mightily and exerted their genius military prowess. Our Nia can be paralleled in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 through 14. In that Nia, our purpose is to maintain faithfulness in the Lord as we continue to be stewards of our history, and He will lead us in the restoration of our memory and thus return us to the path of our greatness, which is outlined in that history. Thank you.
Hello, I'm here to present the principle of KWANZAA called KWANZAA, which means creativity. We come from a God that is ultimately the source of all creativity. And in Genesis chapter 1, it speaks about when God began to create the heaven and the earth being unformed and void with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And in that principle comes the Hebrew phrase, the tohu vabohu, which means something that was formless and empty. And from that came light. And that speaks ultimately of creativity. And even now, we as African Americans dispersed in the diaspora, we have constantly been challenged to show our creativity, just in the mere rebellious act of surviving and thriving in circumstances that would have crushed others. So when we create moments of joy in the midst of unspeakable horror, when we are able to educate our children in the midst of opportunities being lack and few and far between, when we are able to succeed and thrive in circumstances that other people will crumble under, that is creativity. And that creativity sustains us. It's a creativity that allows us to look at circumstances that with the ordinary eye, without any kind of discernment or guidance, you would think there's no way, but God always makes a way. So in closing, in honor of the holidays, I want to leave you with an example. A sweet potato. An ordinary root vegetable, just kind of bland, hard. On its own, nothing. Just kind of starchy. But when you add heat to it, you roast it, sweetness comes out. You can candy it. Add sugar, some marshmallows, and you have candied yams. You can roast it with cinnamon and nutmeg, and you have a savory side dish. But with a little more ingenuity and with a little more foresight and some other stuff, you can make a pie. How someone can see this as a main dish and make this as a pie is an act of creativity and rebellion that I personally enjoy. So this season, as we celebrate Kwanzaa and we remember creativity, KWANZAA, remember, we are descended from the most creative source that there is, God. And if you ever get stumped and think that you're not creative, remember the sweet potato. And remember, with a little love and a little work and some foresight, you can have a pie. Happy Kwanzaa.
We have come now to the last of the 7 principles of KWANZAA, Imani, faith. I've learned from Professor Karenga that this is a wide view of faith. The foundation of faith, a belief and commitment to all of value in the African American community as family, community, people, and culture. It's a faith of the African American community based on African spirituality, the belief of a creator, and the creator who made humans in the image of that creator. And finally, a faith in the struggle for liberation and a higher level of human life. I feel that my voice is inadequate to talk about Imani, and I would like to present an African American voice. And so I chose Amanda Gorman, the young woman that we met at President Biden's inauguration, who was named our first Youth Poet Laureate. She has a new book of poems out, and I chose a poem from that book called Fury and Faith
And I think it talks about Imani. You will be told this is not a problem, not your problem. You will be told now is not the time for change to begin, told that we cannot win. But the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom, even when fast victory is not promised. Meaning we cannot stand up to police if we cannot cease policing our imagination, convincing our communities that this won't work when the work hasn't even begun, that this can wait when we've already waited out 1,000 suns. By now, we understand that white supremacy and the despair it demands are as destructive as any disease. So when you're told that your rage is reactionary, remind yourself that rage is our right. It teaches us that it is time to fight. In the face of injustice, not only is anger natural but necessary because it helps carry us to our destination. Our goal is never revenge, just restoration. Not dominance, just dignity. Not fear, just freedom. Just justice. Whether we prevail is not determined by all the challenges that are present, but by all the change that is possible. And though we are unstoppable, if we ever feel we might fail, if we be fatigued and frail, when our fire can no longer be fueled by fury, we will always be fortified by this faith, found in the anthem, the vow. Black lives matter, no matter what. Black lives are worth living, worth defending, worth every struggle. We owe it to the fallen to fight. But we owe it to ourselves to never stay kneeling when the day calls us to stand. Together, we envision a land that is liberated, not lawless. We create a future that is free, not flawless. Again and again, over and over, we will stride up every mountainside, magnanimous and modest. We will be protected and served by a force that is honored and honest. This is more than protest. It's a promise.